Because first of all, first thing you want to do is kill the pilot. Disconnect it, unplug it, whatever means you have. This does have a lock nut, so you will be required to hold the bolt from the bottom as well. Okay, remove the bolt, remove the ground wire, set to the side. Disconnect the blue wire from the switch bracket. Replace later. Allen wrench and remove or loosen the set screw to remove the cam from the motor. There's two set screws that hold the lock collar in the back. Loosen both of those. These are also 1/8 inch Allen. Now you remove the other two bolts that secure the motor. Again, you'll be necessary to hold the bottom of the bolt while you loosen the nut on the top. These are 7/16. And now before you want to pull the motor completely out, we want to cut the yellow wire approximately midway so it can be spliced together with the new motor installation. Probably best to just pull all the wires that go with the motor, pull them up so that they all come out with the motor. You're going to have a yellow, you should have a blue, and then you'll have a black and red that are tied together. Now just remove the motor by pulling outward from the back wall out of the coupling. You'll note the box becomes loose once the 3 bolts are removed. So, all right, prior to installation of the replacement motor, be sure to put grease, or in this case anti-seize, on the shaft such that the corrosion would not bind the motor to the coupling. So if it has to be replaced later, it can be removed. The motor does have a key on the end of it that must line up with the coupler in the back. It will be necessary to rotate the crank to line up with the key. Basically line your motor with the holes in the box with the holes in the frame. Maybe easiest to install the front bolt first, and then maybe we'll come to the second bolt here. That way it'll keep everything lined up before we try to put in the more difficult bolt in the back.
I got a great shot of
Put that bolt through. Okay, with the replacement motor, you will get a new bracket and switch assembly. Assemble the switch to the bracket as you see shown here. In some cases it may be pre-assembled, in some cases it may not, and the nuts and the bolts will be loose packed. Pre-assemble it in this manner first, and now install this over the bolt in the front. Okay, now before this bolt is secured, we'll need to install our ground wires. And then also we have a motor lead ground. One thing to take note, there's 2 wires that look very similar to each other. In some cases, the ground wire will be a yellow with a green stripe. Do not confuse this with the solid yellow wire. Other cases, this wire may be green with a yellow stripe, so it would be easier to tell apart, but in this case here, this is a yellow with green. We will need to install a ring terminal to this wire and put it underneath this bolt here prior to tightening that bolt. You'll need a ring terminal suitable for 14 to 16 gauge wire and suitable for a 1/4 inch size stud. Now that all the bolts are installed, now you can proceed to tighten them up. Make sure there's no wires that's gotten under the motor or being pinched by a washer or anything. Make sure everything's pulled out of the way. Next thing you want to do now is transfer these wires to that switch. And we'll connect them in the same manner. I'll say the same manner. They should be labeled common and normally closed. Just put the same color back to the same labeling on the wire. See that? All you need to do is identify one of the two. But now the black wire from the motor will connect to the common side of the switch, which were the remaining terminal. You will be required to put a 1/4 inch fast-on terminal on the end of it.
Should I go with the red?
Just because of this one. Slide the switch up where you can get plugged in on. It is a tight fit, but once it's plugged in, it clears the motor. Now reinstall the cam. May be necessary to pull up on the switch or just rotate it till there's a gap or clearance you can slide it on. Now leave this partially loose so the cam can still be rotated so we can adjust the timing of the tank. Next you're going to strip the end of the yellow wire that was cut and then wire nut these two wires back together. Probably place the wires in the kind of out of the way and route the wires where everything's kind of safe from anything that's rotating. Now the setting of the cams, this being an example of being a float activated flush tank system. So when the float is hanging vertically, it's off, but anytime when water fills and it lays horizontally, it will trigger the system to flush. And at that point, we want to adjust the stop point of the motor when the cam shaft are straight up. in the full flushed and open position. So next, after the cam has been placed in position, we need to tighten up this switch prior to adjustment. Cam is still loose, so it can be rotated. We want to rotate the cam to high and push the switch down till you hear a click. So that way you hear a click coming off the rise, you hear a click coming on the rise. So once we get it in position, tighten the nuts that hold the screw and just verify that you hear a click as you rotate to a high spot. At this point, we'll tighten down this switch. The time delay relay setting, and we want to turn it down to minimum so we can adjust the crankshaft and not have to wait on the time. Once the crankshaft is adjusted, we'll readjust that back to its original position. Okay. Now we're ready to set the timing of the crank with respect to the camshaft position. The camshaft stops the motor on the high spot of the cam when it pushes against the switch. With the timer set to 0, so we don't have to wait for that, flip the power on. It may start running immediately. I'll give you an example of that. If the switch were on a low section, it will start running until it gets to a high section. What we want to do now is rotate this cam counterclockwise until the crankshaft is in the full down position. This would be considered the home position. So by rotating the camshaft left allows the camshaft to rotate to the right. So as you can see here, it's close, so I need to go to the left just a little bit more. And there's pretty close up and down. It's hard to get exact. You can continue to work with it to get exact of rotating this cam just slightly more. If you go past your downward position, you can rotate the cam to the right just slightly. If you come up short, go to the left. But at this point here, the camshaft is straight up and down. The motor is stopped. We'll tighten it in this position. Turn the power off before tightening. Now we want to verify the setting. Flip the power on. Bring the time up to roughly about where about midway, just to have enough time to allow the motor to rotate fully to the flush position. So we'll turn the power on, activate this float switch, and now the float will be where the shaft will be straight up and down. This would be in the flush position. Now it's waiting for this time to elapse. You can rotate this down to more of a minimum to activate it. It will go back home. Now the crankshaft timing is set. Set this timer back to the original position. This time is the amount of time it takes for the water to evacuate the flush tank during the flush cycle. It's not recommended to set it too long or the tank will sit there empty while your fill water is just being run through the tank. It might be approximately 30 seconds, but basically time the amount of time it takes for the flush tank to evacuate and then set the timer to that time. And that's all you have to do.